Okay, so I've got the interior you can see there with the stair I've just made, and a few objects there, really just to demonstrate some different things with materials. But first I want to get some lights in, and for that I'm going to use a ceiling. Now, if you are one of the people designing a space with no ceiling or an exposed set of surfaces, so you might have exposed air conditioning ducts and pipes and things like that, if you're going for that kind of look, it's more work. Is anyone planning on doing that? Good, okay. You are? No? Good, okay. Look, we've got people doing it in other classes, but if you're not, then I won't go too far into that. The reason I mention it is because the lights I'm going to show you now are what's called ceiling hosted. So I'm going to open up my ground floor ceiling plan and make sure I can see my ceiling. So to find the ceiling in this view, I'm going to move my cursor onto the edge of the wall and press tab until it highlights my ceiling, and I can see it clearly is there. Now, you probably won't need to change this next option, but I just want to show you anyway because it's important when you work with ceilings to be able to adjust your view range, and you'll find that in view properties. So that's something people maybe won't notice at first, because usually when you look into that properties panel, you might have selected an object and you're looking for the properties of that thing you've selected, say a wall or a door or something like that. So window. So over here you can see there's my window properties. But if you don't have anything selected, it'll give you the properties of the view that's open. So it's important that you realise that. In fact, you might have done this earlier. Did you look at using visibility graphics overrides to get your list of view categories? So it's usually something you'll cover right at the beginning with Revit. But again, if you're not using it all the time, you won't remember it. So that's important. Now this is kind of like Revit's version of layers. And so you can turn off whole categories in here, say walls or windows, or in annotation categories you've got things like reference planes. So I'll do that. Okay, so in this view, here we are, reference planes. I can just turn that tick box off, click OK, and they're hidden. Still there in my other views, it's just that view that's affected. So this is the properties for this particular view. And if I scroll down, you'll find, again, view range for this view. So it's a really important setting. If I click Edit there, the main thing with ceiling plans is that you know how to adjust the top and the view depth. So this is how far up we're looking. Okay, so in this case it's looking up to level 1. My ceiling is under level 1, so that's okay. But you might find that in some cases you can't see your ceiling, and if that happens, just increase that height. So here you can either change the level or you can just put an offset in. Right, so make sure you know about that one, because the biggest problem people often have when they first go to make a ceiling is that they can't then find it in their ceiling plans. And it's just because of the view range, usually. But then you've got another option here, your cut plane. Okay, so the cut plane here you can see is 2300, which is pretty high. That's above head height for a door. So I'm going to bring that down to 2000. So remember, a floor plan is just a horizontal section cutting through at a certain height. So notice here I can't see my door. But now with the cut plane at 2000, if I click OK, now I can see my door. Okay, so remember, just like a floor plan, your ceiling plan is going to be affected by things like your view range, particularly cut plane, and then the top as well. So don't forget about that, because that often will be important. So now I can see my ceiling, and now I can go back to the lighting. So remember, I said we're going to use ceiling hosted lights. So by clicking on the component tool, I'll just go to load family, and I'll start up just in the default library, going to lighting, architectural, internal, and you can see there we've got a bunch of lights. Most of these are ceiling hosted. That means you need a ceiling in order to place them. Sorry? How big? Oh, whatever. Even there are ceilings you can make that have a 0 thickness, and it'll still work with those. So yeah, any thickness. But it's just good to think about that, because if you don't have enough depth between your ceiling and the floor above, the lights will go through into the floor. So you do need to allow a bit of space. Okay, so here we've got downlight spot, downlight recessed can. So they're both downlights. The first one is obviously recessed can. So I'll choose that. And then you can see if I zoom in, it's a circular shape. And notice I can place it here, but not in the stair area, because there's no ceiling there. And of course not outside, because again, no ceiling there. So for these lights you need a ceiling. I haven't put a ceiling in there, so I can't put my lights there either. Right, so I'm just going to place some lights maybe over near the entry here. Okay, so I'll have a look in the perspective view, and you can see the lights there really clearly. So pretty straightforward, as long as you've got the right elements to host them. So back into here, I'll go back to component, load family, and lighting, architectural, internal, got downlight spot. Okay, so this one, you can see maybe from that icon is directional. You can definitely tell over here. So it's difficult. You can change the tilt, but changing the direction it's pointing is difficult before you place it. So I'm just going to choose an angle. So I'll go for, say, 75-degree tilt. And then I'm going to place it over here. And then I can come back and select it and use space to change the angle afterwards. Rotate will work as well if you want a different angle. And then again, when you look at it in 3D, you can see which way it's facing. Alright, so what I recommend when you start placing lights, especially the first time, is that you try to render after you place just a few, just to see what's happening. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to go to the render tool. So if you haven't used that before, it's the teapot on the view control bar down the bottom. Or if you can't find that, you can always go to the view tab, and then you've got a big teapot that says render. Alright, so to render with my lights, again, I'd recommend going to artificial only, so interior artificial only, not exterior. Here at the bottom, interior artificial only, instead of interior sun and artificial, because when you have the sun as well, it's harder to tell what the lights are doing. The sun's very, very bright, far brighter than any man-made light source, so it'll overpower most artificial lights. So we'll go to artificial only, and then I'm going to leave it on draft and just click render. Okay, so it's doing something, but it may look way too dark, or it does look too dark. Now, that's not because the lights aren't bright enough, it's because of what's called exposure. So if you've done in photography, you might be used to that, working with exposure to increase the brightness of your photos. So has anyone got an SLR? Or even on your phone cameras these days, you can play with exposure. So it's called, you know why it's called exposure? The brightness? So, pretty much, yeah. So how do they used to get film exposed? Yeah, aperture in the camera, and then when you're developing it as well, you would expose it to the chemicals. So that's where it comes from. But yeah, it is actually exposing the film to light. So you're right. So that's really a photographic term. And so when you click here on adjust exposure, you'll see that you have a lot of terminology that comes from photography. So the first one is the exposure value, or EV, and here you can see a slider going from brighter to darker. And you will learn these values before long. If you, again, have a look at the photographic controls that you have in a lot of, definitely phone apps have them these days, you'll see these values, EVs, going from about 2, so 2 for an interior, up to about 15 for an exterior. That should be your range. And I know for a space like this with a few lights, we'll need to go down, not quite to 2, but maybe to 4 or something like that. Let's apply. How much better is that? So going down a bit further. Okay, that's a bit too bright. And you can see here that's overexposed. So I've gone too far. So back, and then apply. So that's still maybe a little bit overexposed. So I'll just take it a bit more to the right. And so then I think about adding more lights to fill in the lighting for this space. Okay, so that's the first one, your exposure value. And then you've got these other options. White point's a really useful one as well. You can use that to adjust the warmth or the coolness of your images. So the lighting's the same, we're just changing the exposure. Okay, so I've got a basic setup that I can work with now. So back into my ceiling plan. I can go and place some more lights. Now, unfortunately, there's a bit of a bug with Revit. When you try to copy lights, sometimes it works. It's worked there. I can move that around. Oops. Okay, so it does work sometimes, but it doesn't always. So if you find it doesn't work, just place the way I did earlier. So you can always go back to component, and then any lights you've loaded previously you can just choose from the list there. Okay, so you've got those ceiling hosted lights, and there are lots of them in the library. Don't forget the extra library that we have here when you browse to the P drive. There's a lot more in that. So Revit library, and then so we've got 2 folders here. We've got lighting and then lighting fixtures. So, oh yeah, this is on the one we've got here. So you can copy that and take it with you, but it's bigger than the one that comes with the program. Okay, so I'll get different sort of light. Okay, so I can see these lights here that are also recessed, but much larger than the ones I've done previously. So I'll go back in and render these. Okay, so what you might find is that they're a bit too bright. So, instead of using the exposure, what I'm going to do is adjust the brightness of those lights. So, we've got, they're the same kind of lights, so I can just select either one of them, and then go to Edit Type, and then you'll find lights tend to be all set up the same way. You'll have the intensity and the other properties of the light, or the lighting, down the bottom. So the main brightness control is, it's got a funny name, it's initial intensity. Forget that initial, you'll see that on a couple of things. It's just intensity. So, I mean, technically that is correct. It is initial, but look, I won't bore you with the lighting engineering side of things, something you can look into later. So, there, when you go to initial intensity, again, just think of it as brightness. Then you'll see, at first it might come up with wattage as the way or the method of setting that brightness. And have you seen this before when you've bought light bulbs? Right, you've seen watts on them, and you might have thought, well, why are incandescent bulbs 80 watts or 120 watts when compact fluorescents are 18 watts or, you know, at most 30 watts, and at least as bright as those old incandescent bulbs. But they're the same, they're different wattages. Right, and so it's because watts are not a good method of setting intensity. Watts is the power consumption, and newer, more efficient light bulbs use less power for the same amount of brightness. Right, so they're more energy efficient. And if you're going to use watts, you also need to know the efficiency. And you don't need to do that. If you go to luminous flux instead, you'll see that has a single value, which is lumens. Okay, so lumens are sometimes referred to as metric candles, because luminous intensity is the old unit, and that is in candelas. Candelas are candles. Right? So that's the old imperial system, one of the few things where the imperial system's still probably better than the metric system. But it's good to go metric. So it's just a single unit. It's there are a lot more lumens than candelas. So what is it? It's about 3 lumens to a candela, something like that. And so we'll get used to lumens anyway before long. And so you can see here 2600 lumens is our overall brightness. So I can make it less bright just by changing that. I'm going to make it half, so 1300. And then we've got the colour. So the colour is actually temperature. And you may have come across this before, again, if you've bought new lights, or even if you've bought light bulbs, sometimes it'll have this, it'll say it's cool or warm light. And when you click on the little down arrow here, you'll see that different kinds of lights have different temperatures. And this can be really important for interiors. And for renderings as well. So I think warm, things that are too warm generally don't look good. A bit of warmth sometimes suits certain images, but if you go, say, to, well, metal halide is fairly warm, you can see it's looking pretty orange there. If we go to incandescent, that should be even warmer, so you can see it's really orange and it just doesn't look good. Then xenon is the other way. That's a fairly high temperature. It's looking almost neutral there. It's mainly because the projector is not the best with colours. But D50 or D65, they're close to neutral. And that actually is the normal range for neutral between those two values. And so here, fluorescent white will be about the same. Oh, that's a bit low actually. Cool white probably is better. That's still a bit low. Let's go for light white. Yep, even lower. So you can also set a custom value. So if you go to custom there, then you can type in your own temperatures. And so I'll make it really high, just so you can see with that more blue tone. And really low. 1800 is the lowest. And it will be horribly orange. There we go. Okay, let's go 7. Okay, so I tend to go more on the cool side than the warm side, but I've come back from that. I actually started using more warm lights, or warmer lights than I used to. I used to make everything a bit too cool. So there we are. So 70-50 is quite cool, but you'll notice the difference now if I go to render that. So you'll see these lights are going to be very cool, but the ones over on the left are still warm. There we are. Now, unfortunately, there's this, it's blowing out a bit here. That I'm hoping is just a render artifact. So if you increase the quality, it should resolve a lot of those issues. Okay, so notice it's rendering fairly slowly, but maybe quicker than it will even with the projects as you have them now, because you might have a bit more in your models than I do. But it's still a good idea to start setting up your render before you've got everything in there, just to test the levels and see how it's all looking. So you can see there, that's starting to get better, and as if I increase the quality more, it will be better still, but there I would really think about using a different light if possible. So back into my plan and get rid of these. And so maybe downlights are a good option if you can. Everyone seems to be using downlights these days. So final thing I'll show you there, these downlights are okay, but there's a little quirk they have that most people tend to pick up on before long. Okay, so when I render now, you'll see I've just put those downlights through the space, so I should get fairly even lighting through that interior now. And then, so the downlights work pretty well, but you'll see when you look at the downlights themselves that there's an issue. Alright, now while that's happening, I'll just point out something here. So you can see here it's got artificial lights 9. So the geometry in your model increases the render time, but so does the amount of lights. So when you see a lot of artificial lights, you've got a problem. Okay, so notice how here the light sources look a bit strange because they're lighting the edge, but it looks like it's coming from a black hole. And that's just the way these lights are made. They weren't set up with a filament or anything that emits a glow. So what I've done is I've made a light for you. I'm just going to select one of these lights and go to select all instances, the entire project, go to edit type, and then load, and then onto the P drive. In fact, I'll stop doing that. I'm just going to use my shortcut. I've just been showing you that so you know where it is. I'll use my shortcut now. P drive, interior design, Revit library. And then in lighting fixtures, that's back up. You'll see a file there called the same thing, downlight recessed can glow. So it's glow that I've added there, so you know it's the one that does glow. Yep, recessed can glow. So it's basically the same light. I've just made a few changes and put in some other sizes. Yep. So it just renders a little bit better. And it's easy if you want to make these smaller. I know they're fairly big. You can easily shrink them down as well just in properties. But you'll see without even doing anything, it will render better than the other one. Now, if you want to have a go at making your own lights, I did a video just yesterday for one of the other classes that's on YouTube that shows you all the steps for making a light. Oh, yep. Okay, so I know it's a little thing, but notice how the light does look a lot better. So maybe the final thing there, you can see my colours don't match, so my spotlight has a cooler light than the other one, so I would definitely think about fixing that. So just to remind you, back into edit type, and here is the temperature, so that's far too low for me, and oh, you're kidding. Okay, well let's set it to high and get out of here. Is it a real one? It sounds like a fire drill. Oh god.
Big truck reversing.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, that's pretend. Oh yes, yes.